Last fall, I nervously shared Emily Hanford's articles, Hard Words and a Loss for Words, with my daughter's first grade teacher. You see, I was nervous because the year before, her kindergarten year, Nina received no phonics instruction. None. And when we tried to talk with our kindergarten teacher about how to help our daughter, she gave us this.
Oh dear. Yikes.
And no convincing our teacher or the principal, I went up, that this wasn't research supported made a difference. So in the fall, with a hopeful fresh start, I laid my cards out on the table with her first grade teacher and I sent her the articles, just as I'd be interested to hear what you think about these. And I got this email message back from her. She said, and she quoted Emily's article, "This paragraph spoke to me. Children don't crack the code naturally. They need to be taught how letters represent speech sounds. But by the time scientists had done all the studies to conclude this for sure, a different set of beliefs about reading was already deeply entrenched in many American schools and colleges of education." And her teacher, her current teacher, thankfully, went on to say, "Following school district guidelines is so frustrating because I was taught one way to teach in college. Then when you get hired, you're taught everything you learned in school is wrong, and latest research says teach this way, i.e. balanced literacy."
Yeah.
In my brief, entirely anecdotal, personal experience, I've seen firsthand the challenges that teachers have, and not only staying abreast of the research, but in implementing research-based practices in their classroom. The Reading League, our next speaker, is trying to change that. So I'm pleased to call up Laura Stewart, National Director of the Reading League, to tell us how.
Right,
Laura.
that's very good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So it's truly my privilege to be here with you today. In our brief time, I will be just kind of sharing with you a little bit about the Reading League and talking a little bit about our conceptual models that we kind of underscore our work with. So just a little bit about me. You can read my bio in the little handout there, but the one thing that I think is really important for you to know is that early literacy is my passion. And I've had a long career in education. I've worked a lot in professional development. And what really, it gets me up in the morning, it keeps me awake at night, is this idea that we can teach all children to read, and we're not there yet. And I really appreciate the Mississippi story because it's one of those moments of great promise when we hear that story. And we at the Reading League believe in that promise, that we want to deliver on the promise of literacy for all. I have a mission statement, just kind of a personal mission statement on the wall of my office, that I want to play whatever role I can to ensure that all of our children learn to read joyfully in the primary grades so that they can flourish and thrive as literate citizens of this country, right? So that's kind of my personal story. The story of the Reading League, we are a mission-driven organization, and our mission is to advance the awareness, use, and understanding of evidence-based practices. The origin story, which I'll tell a little bit about us, and Kim Yona is one of our board members, so she could chime in as well. The Reading League started a mere 4 years ago, and it was really started as a grassroots organization of a bunch of Syracuse, I call them stakeholders. These were people at the university level, public school, speech language, parents, who basically said, here's this body of evidence, here's this science of reading that's not being enacted in our schools. And many of them studied with Benita Blackman at Syracuse, and they said, you can't unknow something, right? We know this, and we want to do this, but it's really not happening in our schools. So they started this league, and the logo, you see all these kind of intertwining threads, it's designed to represent the threads of all of us who have this vested interest in ensuring that all of our kids learn to read. And they said, let's just start hosting events for teachers, free. Let's just start giving teachers information, free, resources, videos. And the first live event they held, they invited teachers from the Syracuse area. They thought, we'll get 20, 25 people. They got over 100, right? And they're like, maybe we're onto something. And that's been my experience as well. I work pretty much all over the place around the country, and what I'm finding is this tremendous momentum and this hunger for knowledge. So that's really how the Reading League was born, is really based on this hunger and this almost frustration that this knowledge isn't being shared with the people who need it most, which is our teachers. So this kind of encapsulates why we exist. I'm going to give you just a second to read this. Okay. So we see that the research to practice pipeline is stagnated. This, by the way, is from an article, Ending the Reading Wars. And the authors go on, this is an excellent piece, and the authors go on to say, let's take the example of phonics, for example. Phonics is pretty uncontroversial in terms of our kids need to have this knowledge. English is a phonetic language. There's an alphabetic code that needs to be cracked. So why isn't this really trickling down into practice? So to use that example, they say, here's the thing. There's all this evidence around teaching phonics, but have we really explained to teachers the why, right? Do teachers in their teacher preparation program understand the linguistic underpinnings of the language that then drive us to conclude that we need to have that knowledge in order to be readers? So the Reading League, what we've taken on as our mantle, is really starting there and saying that the most important thing we can do is we can build teacher knowledge, because we can't assume that however many certifications or experience teachers have, that they possess this knowledge, right? And there's a lot of evidence behind that. And it's not their fault. You know, when we look at, Kelly mentioned the National Council of Teacher Quality, and their latest report said that about 50%, 51% of the 1,000 elementary school preparation programs they examined teach the 5 components of literacy. Now, that's an improvement. 7 years ago, it was about 35%, but it's still really not an adequate preparation. And even though their syllabi can be judged to have those 5 essentials, is the methodology and the pedagogy for teaching those really up to the standard of the evidence, right? Kelly mentioned the International Dyslexic Association knowledge and practice standards, which are excellent. And IDA does do some examination of programs to see if they meet those knowledge and practice standards, and it's a pretty short list. Now, granted, it's a voluntary examination, but it's still a pretty short list, right? So this is really where I believe we need to really focus our attention, because even though we have this robust body of knowledge, there are misconceptions that continue to really dominate reading instruction in this country. One of the misconceptions is that learning to read comes naturally. Now, and believe me, I know this really well, because I came up as a teacher during, these what were at that point the conceptual models of reading. So learning to read comes naturally through an exercise. We know that's not true. Marianne Wolf, I don't know if any of you have read her book, Proust and the Squid, which is outstanding, or her latest, Reader Come Home, which examines reading in the digital age. And, she basically says human beings were not born to read. It's not something that naturally happens and is part of the human existence. And that's, of course, because although speaking has been with us for a very long time as a human species, a written code for that has been with us for a very short time. And only about 10% of the world's languages even has a written code. So it's not part of the human experience, right, that just kind of naturally occurs. So creating those neural systems to be able to unlock a written code and read and write is something that really has to come through instruction, right? Reading is a visual skill. That's a misconception as well, and that has led to many practices where, and some of them were the ones that you just showed, the get your mouth ready, all this stuff about eagle eye, and strategies where we ask kids to essentially memorize reading. words. You can't memorize your way to reading, right? Or use pictures. Well, picture clues are going to disappear in a couple of years. Or use context, and really only about 10% of the words can be figured out accurately in context. So those are not sustainable strategies, right? So if this is a conceptual model, what we're teaching kids are strategies that will sustain them as a reader, right? The last one is that there's another misconception that comprehension is all about teaching strategies. And our wonderful colleague Natalie is going to be speaking to that in just a few minutes. So those misconceptions about learning to read have really kind of dominated reading instruction. So when I speak with teachers and when I speak with leaders, administrators, I always say, look, this is not about working harder. There isn't a teacher out there, there's not a leader out there that isn't working as hard as they can. So how do we work smarter? Well, you know, we have to know the evidence. And I was sharing with, I think, Monroe, you and I were talking last night about, you know, this is a hopeful time. It really is a hopeful time because we do have this preponderance of evidence from multiple fields of study. And we can hold our profession to a very high level of understanding that evidence. That's a very hopeful thing. We just have to make sure that that then creates a pipeline to practice, right? So that's one thing we need to do. The second thing is probably the hardest thing of all. Stop what's not working. You know, when we know this evidence, that has to become the litmus test to which we hold all of our practices. But as, you know, teaching is a very emotional thing. And when you as a teacher have seen that much of what you do works for many of your children, it's very hard to say, well, I'm going to give that up and do something else, right? And we as communities, as leaders, as fellow teachers need to support one another in building this knowledge base and supporting practice. So those are the things that I think are really critical. And at the Reading League, we're really trying to take that stance, right? How do we work smarter? So there's a lot of buzz around the science of reading. These are just some of the articles, and maybe some of you have seen these. The Education Week did a nice piece about a year ago called We Have a National Reading Crisis. It was written by educational leaders. And I love what they said. They basically said, okay, you know, there's a lot of stuff we didn't know that we do now, but there's no shame, there's no blame. We just have unfinished work around literacy, right? Education Week also did a nice 3-part series called Getting Reading Right, which kind of encapsulates the science of reading. And then Emily Hanford, who was mentioned earlier, you mentioned Emily. She's done several reports through APM, American Public Media. If you don't know these, I recommend you listen to the audio documentary rather than read it. And she basically, I appreciate her work so much because she's elevated this conversation around the fact that we have children who are not learning how to read and yet can, right? If 95% of us can learn to read and we're here, this is the opportunity, right? This is the potential. And what she's done is she's engaged all stakeholders because she comes at it from a reporter's point of view, which has been really tremendous. So I'm going to let you read this because this just kind of summarizes when we think about the science of reading, what does that really mean? I'm going to let you read that to yourself. Okay, I think there's some really key phrases here. 40 years, convergent research, multiple fields of studies. It is the most studied aspect of human learning, right? So we know a lot. And by the way, this is in the white paper that you all have at your tables there. So when we think about the science of reading, there's a couple of conceptual models that Kelly previewed in her slide presentation. And I'm just going to share a couple of those with you. So one of the conceptual models that we believe is actually foundational to learning about the process of learning to read, and by the way, that's really what we see as missing in teacher preparation programs, is how do children learn to read? Many teacher preparation programs provide activities around reading, but if I'm, as a teacher, understand how children acquire literacy, then that drives my instruction, that drives my intervention, that drives my analysis of what kids can and cannot do. So the simple view of reading basically says that reading comprehension is a product of decoding or word recognition and language comprehension. And the key word here is it's a product. It's not a sum. We don't teach kids in the early grades to decode and then later on layer on comprehension. You and I as readers do this kind of effortless dance through text. in which we deploy both of these capabilities. We as fluent readers, really, really put very little conscious effort toward the first part, because what we've done is we've created these neural systems, primarily in the left hemisphere of our brain, which allow us to have a storehouse of automatically retrieved words. We've done what is called orthographic mapping, which is we've understood this alphabetic code. We've practiced our phonic decoding. We've repeated this act of reading enough so that we have this storehouse of words that are orthographically mapped for instantaneous retrieval. So that allows our brain energy to be freed up to think our way through text and navigate our way through text and employ our language comprehension capabilities. And again, Natalie's going to be speaking so much about that knowledge that we bring to the table as readers that allow us to comprehend, right? So I love the simple view because it's simple, but it represents something quite complex. The other conceptual model that that is really critical for all teachers to understand is this many strands that are woven into skilled reading. And what Hollis Scarborough has done is she's really taken the simple view of reading and said, okay, what are those sub-skills that make up the parts of the simple view? And obviously, there's many strands that go into this. And what I love about this, I think this is just one of the most elegant representations of reading, right? And what she says is that, look, when we develop these capabilities for our students, then what happens is over time, in the language comprehension piece, those become increasingly strategic, right? So you and I, when we move across text and make meaning from text, we don't pull each of those individually apart and deploy them. It just becomes part of our natural strategy for navigating text. The word recognition piece, which really requires explicit and systematic instruction to create that neural system, because it's not something that spontaneously develops. Those pieces become increasingly automatic. Again, so there's very little conscious attention that we devote to that. And as we develop these neural systems, of course, we think about instructional priorities. So when we think about kindergarten, first and second grade, an instructional priority really has to be that word recognition piece, making that automatic, so that we have that storehouse of words in our, what Stanislaus Dehaene says, our letterbox, that we can pull out those words that allow us then to really focus on creating meaning. I love the rope model because then what it comes to is this idea that all of those strands become integrated, right? Reading is an integrative process, and that integration is where skilled reading happens, that fluent execution of all of those. So this is overlaid by the simple view of reading really beautifully. So that's one of the, again, conceptual models of really understanding reading. And of course, that's not everything. So when we think about the components of the science of reading, which have already been mentioned for us here this morning, I did also bring with me something to hopefully, I had copies made for you of here it is, to kind of help flesh out these essential elements of reading. Again, I want to emphasize, though, that although these are components, we don't just teach this one, then this one, then this one, right? Like, how do they work together instructionally? And what is the instructional methodology that underlies the ability to understand and utilize those components? I also include written comprehension. Written comprehension, I believe, is absolutely critical to literacy. And so that's included as well, even though that's not on your little sheet here. So this is from Arkansas Rise. And that's the Reading Initiative for Student Excellence in Arkansas. And I really just think this is a lovely way to kind of summarize the essential elements. So I'll leave that with you today. And again, it's not just about the what, it's also about the how, right? So we want teachers to understand the why, which is kind of those conceptual models and the research and the evidence, the neuroscience, which is an incredibly exciting aspect that we bring to the table for teachers. We want them to understand the what are the components that we need, but we also need to understand the how. How do we teach them? And characteristic of effective instruction, again, evidence-based. Does it hold water against the evidence? Especially that word recognition piece. Is it explicit? Is it systematic? And do we provide practice? Do we provide sustained practice? One thing I see when I travel around and work with teachers and administrators is sometimes they'll say, well, okay, so check, but we're weak in phonics. So we're going to add a standalone phonics piece to our existing program. Well, a standalone phonics piece isn't the answer. Phonics serves reading, right? So we have to make sure that when we're learning these discrete skills, we're applying them in authentic reading and writing. So that sustained practice piece is really important. And when we think about that neural connection, we can teach kids how the sounds and the letters map together, how phonemes and graphemes map together. But it's through that phonic decoding that they develop that automaticity in that letterbox of the brain. So that sustained practice is critical. And then progress monitoring, where are our children? How do we know? When we think about those stages of development that children go through as readers, where are they along that spectrum? What do I need to know to teach them, to move them forward? Where are their gaps? How do I intervene those gaps? Okay. I love this, Mark Seidenberg's book, Language at the Speed of Sight. He says, how do children learn to read? The answer is the same for all children. And Kelly mentioned this too. Cultural, economic, educational circumstances affect their progress, but what they need to learn does not change. Right? Right. And this is the social justice issue of our day. Social justice of our day. Louisa Moats, who's one of my heroes, a large body of research evidence shows that with appropriate intensive instruction, all but the most severe reading disabilities can be ameliorated in the early grades and students get on track to success. We know that we can teach 95%, at least 95% of our kids to read. So if we're here, that's the opportunity, right? That's the possibility, that's the promise. And again, there's no shame, there's no blame. We just all have unfinished work on literacy. And that's, I think, why we're all here. So just a few things about the Reading League, because I want to share with you a little bit more about what we're trying to do. The Reading League, we offer a national conference. Last year we had about 900 people. This year we're expecting 1,200. We're moving to Albany, so join us. Come to Albany. It's October 27th, 28th, and our theme this year is going to be bringing the science of reading to light. We offer free resources for educators. Please check us out on our website. We have videos, we have just resource documents, we have recommended books that teachers can use for their professional learning communities or for book studies. We offer membership. We offer free membership so people can just join us and network with us and get a quarterly newsletter. We also offer a paid membership, and with the paid membership comes our brand new hot off the press journal. We're all very excited about this. Would you say, Kimiona? This is like, yay. And actually, this is our very first one. It's called Demystifying the Science of Reading. We've got wonderful, wonderful articles, including a book review of The Knowledge Gap, Natalie's book, right? We have live events. Remember, I shared with you one of the first things the Reading League did is offer a live event where they expected 20 people and 100 came. So we're continuing to offer live events, and what's really exciting is now we've started live streaming them. So Dr. Susan Hall is going to be speaking about multisyllabic words in March, and then we have a couple of other medical doctors speaking about autism in May. And then in July we're going to, I can't remember what we have coming up in July. But check us out because these live events are really, really terrific. And again, this is building that knowledge base for our teachers. I think our journal is one of a kind, just because it's really designed to bridge that evidence and practice, right? Remove that obstacle that we've seen over and over. We offer professional development services. Right now, we're really engaged with a couple of districts in the greater Syracuse area, because that's, again, kind of the hub of where the Reading League is. One district is called Lynn Court, and we have a video on our website about the Lynn Court engagement. We're really focusing on transformative change as opposed to what we call additive change. So we want to engage with districts over time to help support their teachers and their administrators. We speak at events and conferences to kind of promote the science of reading and the work that we're trying to do. And finally, one of my roles as the national director is to support the formation of chapters in other states. We now have a Reading League chapter in Oklahoma, we have one in Wisconsin, and we have one in Pennsylvania. And if anyone's interested in a North Carolina Reading League chapter, please see Chris. Chris, raise your hand, everybody, because she's kind of leading the effort to perhaps start a Reading League North Carolina. All right, so thank you very much. Please follow us. Please check out our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, check out our website. And I just want to personally thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. There's my email if you'd like any more information about anything we touched on. And also please follow me on Twitter. And thank you very much. Any questions? Do we have time for questions?
We have time for
Okay, one question.
We have one.
Laura, I think the founding, the connection with, that you helped make with Pleasant Rollins is a story worth sharing.
Oh, okay. So my experience has been working on a national scale with professional development. I've led many projects, including the Reading First project in the state of Wisconsin. And I also had the privilege of working for the Rowland Reading Foundation. It was founded by a woman named Pleasant Rowland. Some of you may know her as the founder of American Girl. Anybody here? Anybody? All right, so if any of you have invested in American Girl dolls, you've helped the cause of literacy, because she started a nonprofit reading foundation. And I had the privilege to work with her. And so there's been just kind of a wonderful confluence that has allowed for Pleasant Rowland to provide a wonderful donation to the Reading League, which has really helped us to grow nationally. Is that the story? Yeah, really good.
Any other questions? We're digesting. I know, we're throwing a lot at you.
Well, thank you for letting me come today. I'm from Chicago, and so it was lovely to come down here to meet with all of you, but also lovely to be down here because it's nice and warm.
It is warm,
It's really nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Laura. I appreciate you sharing that. I want to take a minute to thank the Friday Institute for hosting us today. I know Heller Spires is with us, and Tripp Stallings is stepped out, and anybody else from the Friday Institute or NC State here with us today. Thank you, John Bagney with HELPS, if you're interested in intervention expertise there. Okay, well, I know the North Carolinians are very familiar with Friday Institute, but they've been a fabulous partner to the Belk Foundation over many years on several issues that we care about, and we're so fortunate to have them in our state. So Heller, thank you for hosting us here today.